I'm going to talk about the Indian experience with procurement, with public procurement liberalization and the ongoing dilemma whether it should join the GPA. So this is where I'm coming from. I'll start off with a brief background and overview about public procurement at the international level, essentially the multilateral level, and then quickly go on to talk about the case study that we've done for India. And in this case study, what we do is, interestingly enough, we use a business tool. Me coming from business school, well, I just couldn't keep my hands off. And I used a business tool called the Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities and Threat framework to analyze whether it would be feasible for India to even think or contemplate joining the GPA anytime in future. And then I'll conclude and I'll come up with some suggestions as well. Now, government procurement, as we all know, can be historically traced back to the GATT. Well, it was Tokyo around 1973. That was for the first time we started talking about procurement liberalization. And at that time, it was only goods which was within the ambit of talks. Eventually, these talks dragged on and carried on. And it was only in 1994, under the WTO, that they decided to include government procurement as a plurilateral agreement, which meant that only those countries that would sign up to this agreement were members, and hence they were the ones that had the obligation to liberalize. Now, if you look at the composition of member countries, we see that there are 42 member countries currently, out of which only 6 are developing countries, and the remaining are developed countries. So let's start now talking about the problems and issues with regards to developing countries. The current WTO GPA, this has been renegotiated and it's going to come, the revised one will come into effect beginning next year. And this is going to have special provisions for developing countries. In Article 5, it allows developing countries to have price preference programs, offsets. It allows them to even phase in entities over a period of time, and also to have higher thresholds initially, but reduce these thresholds progressively to GPA levels. I won't go into the details of it because my eye is on the wall and I know I have just 20 minutes to push. But despite special efforts to bring developing countries into the GPA, there is still lack of interest. And as we see, interestingly enough, bilateral agreements are being used increasingly as a means to liberalize procurement between countries. And in addition to this, what makes the system what makes the scenario much more complex is that protectionism is persisting. This has been ongoing. We can trace it back into history, but most recently it was the Buy American Act, and now it is Buy European Act, which is being highly debated at the moment, and this is really causing a lot of worry. Me being an economist had to stick in something about economic rationale, otherwise I couldn't have stood here. What is the economic rationale for procurement liberalization? Well, it's justified on grounds of that market access would be improved for countries that are members to the GPA. This is going to have, this is going to increase domestic competition, international competition, which then means prices are going to go down and systems would be more efficient, and this would then have better value for taxpayers' money. This then also would have knock-on economy-wide positive effects in terms of output, resource allocation, employment generation, better gross national product and stuff. So there is a lot of economics going on behind government procurement liberalization. Let's go on to the case study that we've done on India. India has been in focus in the recent months, and reasons are following. First, India became an observer government to the GPA in February 2009, but that wasn't it. That was just the beginning. Other important factors why we got interested in India's potential GPA accession was that it's an emerging economy. It's growing. It has stable economic indicators, and growth rate predicted is roughly 8.5% per annum. So clearly, there is potential for foreign firms to get in and get access into the Indian market. In addition, we did some calculations and found out that central government procurements were on the rise. They grew from 2% in 2002 to 5% of total GDP at 2008-9 prices. So clearly, expenditure on public procurement has been on the rise. But of late, this really has become a very important issue because there has been a lot of discussion on corruption, and this is especially in the light of Commonwealth Games. This was just last year, and this is how government procurement became all of a sudden very important in India, and there was general talk about lack of transparency, high corruption in procurement activity, and this was actually the starting point for our research. So what is the current legal framework in India? At the central government level, now I have specifically written central and not state government. Now in India, the constitution allows for central government and state governments. Now at the central government level, there are a variety of rules and regulations that govern the procurement framework. One are general financial rules, which were for the first time promulgated in 1962, but were amended and updated in 2005. Another one is Delegation of Financial Rule 78. There are different manuals, and these manuals are for goods, services, construction services. Then we've got a governmental body called, which is DGS&D, is Director General Supplies and Disposals. Now this is a governmental organization which provides guidance to central government or to state governments in the event they cannot find relevant procurement rules in any of these manuals or these rules, whatever. In addition to this, we also have something called the CVC, which is the Chief Vigilance Commission. And this provides, again, supplementary rules on how procurements should be done, what is best, how to get best value for money, and also how to increase transparency. So as you can see, we have quite a few actors within the procurement framework. Now, within this framework, we find a spluttering of UNCITRAL laws. We have World Bank guidelines. We draw from best practice cases, country cases which the WTO has put up. India also draws, in addition to all this, from GPA. And what it draws from GPA is essentially e-tendering. So as you see, it is pretty confusing and very complex picture at the moment. It's not a simple, coherent framework. In addition to this, there are also Article 299 of Indian Constitution provides specifically for price preferences, for balance, it recognizes that the government needs to procure to ensure balanced regional development, to provide, to support socially disadvantaged communities. And so basically it brings out the social element of procurement. There's also a Contract Act, which is pretty dated. If you see 1872, it's not a typo, 1872. And Sale of Goods Act 1930. So now these are pretty dated. And this is what is the existing procurement framework in India. Now, if we look at the rules and how they are applied, we find they vary between state governments and the central government. And in addition, to make the situation much more complicated, we've got public sector enterprises, and they've got a separate set of rules. So here we are getting into a territory which is highly confused. We've got central government different rules, state government separate set of rules, public sector enterprises separate set of rules, and these include railways, defense, and you have different procurement thresholds as well. And you will see this in a minute now. So public procurement within the Indian context, if we start breaking it down, central government, state government, and Indian Railways is an example of public sector. So if you look at the procedure, we see, and the threshold, you see that thresholds vary between state, central government, and PSUs. So what essentially is 50,000 for central government is 20,000 for state government, and more than 100,000 for Indian Railways. Now the response time is the same, interestingly enough. So one thing we found which applied across the board. When it comes to preferential treatment, we found that all small-scale industries, public sector enterprises, cottage and village industries essentially producing hand-spun textiles, which is called khadi, cotton. They were allowed preferences, and this ranged anywhere from 5 to 15%. And there was an additional price preference allowed by state governments on top of this, and also to their state enterprises. And similar was the case in railways. Essentially, their own railway organizations which produced coaches got preference over foreign suppliers. With regards to settlement of dispute, there is no clear, current rules say that the central government, which is the Director General, Supplies and Disposal, is going to be responsible for settlement of disputes. Now, ironic, this is an organization that provides guidelines and that provides guidance on how procurements should be done. Interestingly enough, this is the one that's going to be looking at disputes. Similarly, at the state level, it is the state government officer that looks into dispute. And in railways, they have their own system of vigilance. So I think I have been able to convey to you that it is pretty lumpy and it's very complex, and you see that there is lack of communication between different departments here. So this was the biggest problem. So what we did was we did the SWOT analysis, and as we all know, this is a business tool employed by firms to assess what strategy they should have. So we thought, well, if firms can do a SWOT analysis, why can't we do a SWOT analysis for India to decide to help us determine whether India is ready for GPA accession or not? So we looked at internal factors, external factors, and we started working out what were the strengths. If we look at the strengths of Indian procurement system, well, we say that currently it's going through a period of reform, because what has happened is after the Commonwealth Games scandal, the Indian government woke up suddenly and decided to come up with the procurement reform bill. And I'm associated closely with that, and I'm working as an advisor. So it's very interesting. But I must say that it's not really drastically different from what the previous regime is. In addition, we've got a few state governments that have adopted and implemented fully electronic tendering, and they're also now moving towards auctions. We've also got institutional and regulatory framework reforms, and this is the Competition Act. So the Competition Act was enacted in 2002, which was updated in 2007 again. There's a Competition Commission, and essentially the objective is that there should be no collusion. It's trying to do something. It's creaking along. India has also accepted integrity pacts, which have been formulated by Transparency International. And, these are sets of agreements. It's a voluntary agreement between the bidders and the contracting authority to ensure that there will be no collusion. And in case there are a set of sanctions that are triggered off. I won't go much into detail, but nevertheless, there are some positive developments which look like as if India is moving on the path to simplify its existing system. But still there are weaknesses, because the existing system is not simple. It is just not coherent. And most importantly, there is no system for bid challenge. There is also no system of providing feedback to those bidders that have been unsuccessful. Besides, dispute settlement mechanism rests with the government. Now, another weakness is, in case India decides to join the GPA, transaction costs are going to be very high. And these transaction costs we thought were first negotiation costs, implementation costs, and then firms' adjustment costs and the entire economy's adjustment costs. So these direct and indirect costs are going to be very heavy, and it might not be possible for a developing country like India to bear this without having an impact on the economy. Interestingly enough, India does not have a procurement database. So we have no idea how much is being procured. It's not done scientifically. And the calculations which we did also weren't really very scientific. We just went into the database and picked up some. So, and most importantly, corruption is a major problem. And I'll discuss about corruption in the next slide. External factors. So what are the opportunities for India in case India decides to join the GPA? Well, it's going to benefit from low-cost international suppliers, well, because we know liberalization will increase competition. So we'll have low-cost international suppliers. But and at the same time, Indian firms, which are competitive, will be able to enjoy enhanced market access into foreign markets. At the same time, we say that there will be some spillover effects, and these spillover effects will be in terms of employment generation. It will come from increased exports from those firms that are competitive, which means that there will be employment generation. And it's going to be good for India because India has a sizable population within 25 to 35 years of range. There will be innovation, there will be R&D. So there are going to be positive effects of this. And most importantly, if India decides to join the GPA, it can benefit from S&D provisions. But there are problems. The Indian government perceives that there are threats from a small and medium firm, that there are threats to small and medium firms, and because they just are not competitive enough and they are at a disadvantage. And India also fears that since none of the BRIC countries are currently members of the GPA, it will lose out on their goodwill, and will also lose it. This will be a loss of collective bargaining power which it enjoys. Won't go much into detail, but what is the current state? India has woken up, and they are tackling this dragon of corruption, which has been hiding away somewhere, and it just came to limelight last year. It has been a major problem in the Commonwealth Games, and the loss that as a result of Commonwealth Games was immense, and most importantly, well, it lost out on the esteem factor as well. And 2G bandwidth spectrum licensing in the telecom sector has been a very major scam, and the total losses from this scam were as high as annual defense budget, because licenses in 2010 were allocated at 2001 prices. And well, the minister got into jail. There have been several mining scams, and hence it has this issue of addressing corruption in procurement has become very topical. My last slide. On the basis of the SWOT analysis that we did, I haven't been able to really do justice and go into details to explain. But whatever analysis we did, it came to light that challenges and constraints really outweigh benefits and opportunities. And India is just not ready to join the GPA at this minute. It's really far from being ready. And it's very important, if India wants to join the GPA, that there is political commitment to cleaner procurement, because there is commitment at the moment, but we really do not know, what is the extent of that commitment. And it's only that the reform bill, if it gets through with major additions, then I would say that there is political commitment. Otherwise, it's just an eyewash. So what will be the next steps? Next steps, we need to have a national framework which is comprehensive, coherent. They need to have a bid challenge system. As I explained, there's none at the moment. They need to identify critical and sensitive sectors. Essentially, these sectors are the ones which will suffer or benefit if India liberalizes, and they need to have a procurement database for that. And it's important that they address enhanced transparency, because there is none at the moment. They need to streamline tendering. They need to corruption is a major issue, major problem. We need to address that. So given that India is not ready to join the GPA at this time, which means it has to be content with its observer status, what does it need to do to make sure that it gets a position at the GPA, as a member of the GPA? Most importantly, India being a developing country, one can say it needs technical assistance and capacity building, because it really does not have trained procurement specialists that are able and will help India negotiate to its advantage. In case India decides to negotiate, first thing it should do is, which we also write, that only selected central government entities should be covered under the commitments, and they should be phasing in sub-central entities later. And also, I should have written that thresholds should be higher and they can come down. So it means if India joins the GPA, it should actually be preparing on lines of what special and differential treatment provisions offer. And well, I know I'm really short on time. I can't do much justice, but I'll be very happy to discuss with any of you who would like to know more about this case study. So thank you so much.